Hey everybody, Some Gadget Guy here, and I feel the need to produce a crazy in-depth camera review on the Samsung Galaxy S6, so let's get to it. Starting off with our brightly lit outdoor shots, as a general rule throughout this whole series of tests and samples, we can pretty much just take it for granted that the S6 is prone to overexposing. Thankfully, like on the Note 4, we do have control over exposure, and when you're in Pro mode, you can still control how bright or dark a shot is while shooting UHD video. For the most part, I'll try to keep the camera on auto to be consistent with other reviews, but for shots that I have adjusted exposure, I'll note that in the upper left-hand corner of the frame. Lighter flowers in direct sun are often clipped, losing detail in the highlights. This white flower is just barely holding on to details in the petals. Dropping the shot a stop helps tremendously in bringing out more fine detail. Yellows fare even worse, as Samsung's tendency to oversaturate creates a very harsh, bright scene. Dropping this shot a stop also helps rein in some of that eye-piercing brightness. Reds are of course the most difficult for digital sensors to expose for, and the GS6 runs about mid-pack here in creating a hypercolor mess. Stopping down does help, especially giving us a bit more contrast. Thankfully, the Galaxy S6 camera now includes options to manually adjust color, temperature, and tint, contrast, saturation, highlights, and shadow detail. Unfortunately, you can't use this level of image processing while shooting UHD, but dropping down to 1080p, you can see how only dropping the saturation can radically change up the quality of the video. Taking direct sunlight out of the equation, these purple bougainvillea blossoms in the shade are very nicely exposed, and while it's still a really juicy saturation, we're not wrecking fine detail. On a wide shot, it's very clear to see that the S6 is saving a very high quality video file packed full of fine detail. It's an almost 50 megabit per second video file, which is about a 50% improvement over the G Flex 2 we recently ran through similar tests. The focusing system is quick and sure-footed. It doesn't have the satisfying snap of LG's laser-assisted focus, but I can't detect any lag, and actual focusing speed seems to have reached parity with the G Flex 2. I still think it's a bummer that you can't pre-focus your shot before pushing record, as sometimes the focus will stay and sometimes it'll reset, but at least refocusing in good light is snappy and quick. We'll have more to say on focusing when we get to our low light tests, however. Macro shots on this sensor and lens combination are fantastic. We're able to get closer to our subject than on any other Samsung I've used in the past. There's a stunning amount of detail, and the bokeh is beautiful. The depth of field on this larger sensor is incredible. It's a quality of photography and video that smaller sensor cameras, like the shooter found on the iPhone 6, will never be able to replicate, especially when working at macro distances. You're treated to a delicious, creamy background with few elements distracting the eye. Even shooting from 1.5 feet away, watch as these cars stay blurred until they're close to the plane of focus parallel with this lily. And that plane of focus stays fairly thin. Look at the barbs on the fence, as the barbs closer to the lens are also starting to blur, moving away from the focus point. Simply stellar performance. The zoom test here is a bit silly at UHD, as there obviously aren't enough megapixels to resample and crop in this far. The image is just blown up and over-sharpened and not altogether very pleasant at the full 8x zoom. Backing off to 3x, however, is a very acceptable compromise between a little extra reach and retaining fine detail. Into our walking test, the Galaxy S6 does still use hardware stabilization while shooting UHD, but no software stabilization. The hardware solution here very much resembles the wobble you might see from a Nokia camera using OIS. It might be a touch distracting, but I greatly prefer this over the shakiness you'll see on non-image stabilized phones. Scaling back to 1080p again with software stabilization activated, we get almost the same unnaturally smooth floating effect we saw from the iPhone on this test. Onto a traffic scene, detail and action are captured very well with nice, crisp video. Even in this somewhat harsh mid-afternoon light, we're getting great dynamic range. On top of the phone's natural tendency to overexpose, only white cars are really clipping here, and the sky still has a very nice shade of blue going on. In good bright light, we should be able to pause at just about any moment to land a pretty well-detailed 8-megapixel image free from any kind of motion blur. We see the same on our freeway shot, nice crisp action, excellent detail, and Samsung is doing a very good job with the audio. There's a healthy amount of noise reduction, but not so much that it's creating warbling or distortion, and you can clearly hear different vehicles driving through the scene. It still doesn't quite catch a Lumia 930 or 1520, but it's best-in-class performance for Android devices and noticeably better than the mono audio found on the iPhone 6. on to our transition test, moving from dark to bright and back. Since the Note 2, Samsung has dominated in this test, and the GS6 continues a tradition of making some of the most pleasant exposure changes I've ever seen, as the phone gracefully blooms between brightness changes. Performance here doesn't seem to have improved over the Note 4, and there is a little more of a buzz moving from bright back to dark, but it's still class-leading performance. Obviously, it won't shoot in UHD, but the Samsung does include a slow-mo option. On the Note 4, slow-mo is rendered to play back at 30 frames per second. On the Galaxy S6, Samsung now leaves the RAW file alone, and it retains the 120 frame per second info at 720p resolution. When played back on a computer, it plays at normal speed, so you have to run it through some kind of editing software to slow it down to 1/4 speed. The iPhone can still push slower, but the Galaxy has stepped up their game here, offering maybe the second best smartphone slow-motion video I've seen yet. You can also do the same trick at 1080p using the 60 frame per second mode and slowing it down by half, delivering very nicely detailed images. Now into some night shots, and the overexposure situation continues to be an issue even in lower light shots. Like the G Flex 2 we recently reviewed, the phone is just working way harder than it needs to expose an image here. It's nighttime, it's dark, it's okay to scale this back a bit. Headlights and streetlights bloom and wash out quite a bit of information. Thankfully, unlike the LG, we can actually scale back the exposure a little, and we achieve a much nicer nighttime shot here, closer to what this scene actually looked like in real life. Ditto our not so creepy anymore tunnel, utterly washed out and losing contrast thanks to that streetlight blooming like a small sun. Stop it down a notch and we get a much better view of this underpass. Noise is becoming an issue on our creepy gate shot. Even stopping down, the phone is still pushing the exposure to its limits. That's creating a very unpleasant grainy noise to creep into the scene. On the whole, I like what Samsung is doing with white balance, erring on the side of warmer colors, though I still could do with just a bit more yellow or orange in this shot, as this gate is lit by a really ugly security light. On our walkway shot, we can clearly see the difference between the color temperature of these two bulbs and the brighter exposures, creating more noise than we need, and again, stopping down gives a more accurate scene, better contrast, and less noise. As mentioned earlier, there are some issues with focusing in ultra low light, especially when approaching macro distances. It's fairly inconsistent when it might strike, but occasionally the phone will just refuse to lock focus while shooting video. Frustrating, as you will still be able to lock focus for a still photo. Obviously, more light will help, but there are times when the camera can lock in near total darkness, only to flake out on slightly better lit shots. Hopefully, this will be addressed in a future software update. So, where does that leave us with the Galaxy S6? Like my experiences with the Note 4, this is one of the most fun smartphone cameras I've used, bringing noticeable improvements over the Galaxy S5. The hardware brings us up to the great cameras found on Sony and Lumia phones, while the app has also improved over the Note 4. The experience can be made almost iPhone simple, or for folks who want to delve into minute control over their photo and video composition, those tools are available to do so. While there are certainly some issues with exposure, I still feel very confident claiming this camera the best in the Android ecosystem at the time this review was produced, of course, and it's at least a full generation ahead of the iPhone 6 in terms of clarity of output, sensor size, bokeh, and control over composition. Really, the only fight it decidedly loses to Apple is slow motion video. Samsung has been on a roll, and the Galaxy S6 does not disappoint. It's a top-notch shooter, offering up a fantastic experience. I'll of course leave some links down below this video for more info on the Galaxy S6 and where you can shop it online. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more reviews like these, and I would not be able to continue producing on this channel if you all weren't out there sharing my videos on social sites like Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Google+. So keep bringing more cool people to the party. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next review.